Well, today we're going to talk about a new idea on the schools beat for an innovative middle school, high school. And we're happy to welcome Joe Lee to our panel. Joe, you've been heading up the secondary subcommittee for the Enrollment Management Advisory Committee for the school district. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this.
I've lived in Palo Alto for about 25 years. I'm a parent. I have a little boy who's in third grade in Escondido. And I thought this was a pretty important topic for the district to investigate, and so I volunteered my time, along with 10 other parents. And we've been working on this since April or so.
Yeah. And Elena, give us a little bit of background for this whole enrollment, this growth investigation and recommendations process.
Sure. So the superintendent convened another enrollment committee, which the district has had once in the past, but they really had a very particular focus. I think the last one was actually named the 13th Elementary School Committee. So
very specific.
Very specific, which a lot of people have said. I think you guys sort of understood that narrowed the focus and sort of didn't leave room for more broad, innovative ideas about how to manage enrollment growth and how to think about enrollment in the schools. So Max really wanted this to be a broad, open view of enrollment across, K through 12, not just about elementary schools, not just about the high schools or middle schools. So this committee started its work earlier this year and split off into secondary and elementary subcommittees. So Joe's the secondary subcommittee head, and both subcommittees recently presented their sort of in-progress research and preliminary proposals around what to do at elementary, middle schools, and high schools. And your guys' presentation was last Monday at the board meeting. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, there was a lot of enthusiasm for one particular idea that you guys brought. There were a number of speakers,
there was more than an hour of public comment, a lot of excitement about the idea of an innovative 6 through 12 middle school, high school being opened at Cubberley, which is your primary recommendation.
We had two recommendations. That was one.
Right.
And, but we recommended to the board that we have a both and narrative against this. I thought it was important. It's fun and sexy to talk about a new secondary school, but equally we wanted to do something about the existing schools that we have. And we recommended the nature of the idea of small learning communities against that.
Yeah. I'm just really struck by the whole charter of your group. Taking a look at enrollment, projecting it out. There have been so many different times that the school board has looked at enrollment growth. Is it going to grow? Do we need to open that 13th elementary school? First of all, how did you look at this issue and how did you parse it out so that you could actually come up with a recommendation at this point?
Well, it certainly helped that we were able to split the team up into two halves, the elementary subcommittee and the secondary one. For the secondary one, we kind of thought of it as an exercise in change management. We wanted to understand whether whatever we come up with would be accepted by the community. And we wanted to back that up with facts and anecdotes and as many interviews as possible. So we took a pretty holistic, comprehensive view by looking at not only interviews and focus groups, but also looking at the academic research, looking at comparable schools, going actually to a few local schools, looking at national averages. And we felt that by pulling together data, that would be the only way we can convince the community that something might need to be done. But we didn't want to prejudge the answer. So we wanted to know for ourselves whether something needed to be done. And while we found that there was no single smoking gun that said, something must be done, because the schools here, frankly, are very good already, it's more of the preponderance of data that we pulled together that said, well, maybe there's indication that action is needed rather than keeping the status quo.
I was struck by a term that was in your report that described a sense of restlessness was the terminology. That obviously is not data-driven. That's a very kind of emotional reaction to what you on the committee are hearing from the community. What is the sense of restlessness? Define that for us.
It started with some of the viewings of the documentary.
Most likely to succeed.
Yeah, that's right. Back in April, where there's over 1,800 parents who are interested, and 83% of them afterwards said they were interested in something like this. And then from that, I know, and from the committee knew that there's been private meetings outside of the district where parents have gotten together in groups, small groupings, and talking about ideas like this. And from that and from other sources, we just sensed that in the course of our work, there was a lot of built-up demand in the community for something like this. And we wanted to see if we can take advantage of that because we feel that this is kind of a unique moment in time.
So a lot of that has to do with the current buzzword in education, project-based learning, and I'm sure you've spent a lot of time trying to identify what that really means, and it probably is one of those things that means different things to different people. But for purposes of what your committee is envisioning at both the proposed new school and changes in the programming at the current middle and high schools, what exactly does that mean? How would I, as a parent, see something different than what I now am experiencing?
Well, project-based learning is the idea where instead of learning classes in the silos, you actually kind of do a cross-team approach to working together in small groups, coming up with facts and data together, and then marshaling an argument in the same way that our subcommittee actually did, work together as adults, right? We're kind of learning those skills. Yes, we understand it's kind of a buzzword now, but we did a survey. We did over 1,200 parents, and we asked them to rank the different types of programs that they like to see beyond the comprehensive program. And surprisingly, project-based learning was the very top of the list, followed by Connections, which is kind of a team-based learning approach, followed by International Baccalaureate, right? And so, I think this is one of the areas where we have some points of view as a committee, but certainly more work has to be done in order to actually make a recommendation to the board, and that's why we recommended the idea of a task force. That if the board decides to go ahead, they should really delve into some of these issues around what exactly is the right model for the new school, if we have a new school, and equally importantly, what should we do with existing schools? Because we have about 7,000 kids altogether in the secondaries, around 3,000 for the middle and 4,000 for the high school. Even if we were to open a new school, we can only cover 1,000 of those, right? Maybe 1,200, right? So I think we need to think about the whole thing, like you said.
So one of the concerns that surfaced just in the last few days since this report came out is that the proposal was to have a much smaller fourth middle school and a much smaller third high school, but that new site really would not alleviate the kinds of enrollment pressures in a significant way because of how few kids it's really going to draw off from the other schools. Can you address that?
Yeah, let me talk about a couple of perspectives. Right now, our high schools and our middle schools are way too big, right? Compared to the research and what local schools do and what best practices say, they're easily 400 to 500, 600 students too big. So the idea would be that we would want to reduce that size problem. And our current thinking was that Cubberley should, because it's the last piece of big land available to this district, should be opened. And we're thinking at least 1,000 kids to start with, but maybe it should be more, to really offload those concerns. And if you don't do Cubberley, or if you try to shove more kids into the existing high schools and middle schools that we have, it's like filling wine jugs with even more wine. It's not gonna work, right? It's gonna be bad for the wine, for kids or wine. So I think again that's a design element that we want to look into. Our initial thinking was at least 1,000 kids, right, to be drawn across the district, but maybe it should be more. To your point, right? And then we think it's important to do both recommendations.
How was your recommendation, all of your thinking around this new school informed by what the elementary subcommittee has found and also their preliminary recommendations?
Well, we actually aligned ourselves on the enrollment forecast. We actually worked together with Todd Collins, who's the leader of the elementary subcommittee, and together we worked on an enrollment forecast that says, well, based on the number of kindergartners who are coming in, we can actually project, and there's some historical numbers that says the projection is pretty constant over time. It's not like there's a sudden influx of kids who come in at the 6th grade or the 8th grade. So if you know what your projections are, we were able to connect pretty much all the way through high school. And what we learned is that our middle schools, which are already big, will be even bigger by about 150 kids next year. So, and then our high schools, right now they're about 3,900 altogether. They'll grow by another 700 kids by the year 2020. And then after that, it's kind of unknown, but it was important to me and to the other subcommittee members that we align our forecasts and be consistent with a single message to the board so they can make a decision holistically.
You identified Cubberley as a huge unused parcel right now by the school district. I imagine that when you go into a project like this, that the sky's the limit. You could have rearranged almost any configuration of schools, moving middle schools here or there, using Pali, for example. Maybe that should be the innovative school. Was there much kind of just pie in the sky kind of thinking that eventually led kind of to the Cubberley Innovative High School?
There was some of
idea?
that. For example, one of the ideas that one of our focus groups brought up was maybe we should think about Palo Alto as a single school, where people are moving from school to school to learn classes. You take band here and ceramics there. We looked at that a little bit, but we kind of rejected it kind of at this phase because we thought there might be too much in terms of transportation and getting things across. So maybe we weren't as blue sky as we could have been.
Yeah.
And so we said, what's practical? What will the community accept, and what's reasonable answer for now? Now, maybe smarter brains can look at it and look at a different answer.
Yeah.
We wanted to be practical as well.
Yeah.
So if I understand the initial proposal, it is that the school that's created or proposed to be created at the Cubberley site would be a choice school, that it would be designed to attract students from all over the district, and that presumably if there weren't enough seats, there would be a lottery system similar to the other choice programs. Is that right? So I was struck by one of the pages in your report that reported on the results of a parent survey that you did, that basically at the middle and high school levels asked parents, would they prefer that a choice program be at a separate school, such as Eloni and the immersion programs, or would they prefer that it be integrated, these project-based learning be integrated into the existing schools? And by a huge margin, people said integrate them into the existing schools. It was 75% said that versus 25% saying create a new school. So this was not really addressed, but it's hanging out there as a stark contrast to what the committee's actually recommended. So could you respond to that?
Yeah, we found it hard to reconcile the desire to have innovation of the existing schools with the notion of the wine in the jug that we were talking about earlier, where the existing schools are already so big, right? So maybe there's a hybrid model that we could explore, but I think our reasoning behind the choice school at Cubberley would be the fact that when you start out something new, you need to give the community a sense for what the strategy and the charter of that school will be, because Gunn and Pali are really existing brand names that are so well regarded already. And to force an arbitrary redistribution of boundaries against that would seem to be unfair to some parents. So maybe for the first X years, we would encourage people to draw all over the community to that school rather than forcing them to go to that school. And secondarily, we found that one of the reasons behind having a program that's separate and apart is that we found some resistance to innovation at the schools. It wasn't an easy thing. It certainly can be done, and we have great programs like Connections and the social justice pathway at Pali and other programs, but those are relatively small programs, and it requires a lot of overcoming a lot of inertia to make those happen.
One quote that really struck me, sorry to interrupt you, is just that, and it must have been one of your focus groups, was that teachers were saying teachers who do try sort of innovative out-of-the-box things are viewed by other teachers as renegades or
Mavericks.
Mavericks, yeah.
Mavericks initially, and then maybe over time they're accepted,
Yeah.
right? And we thought that just like IBM back a long time ago was required to open up Boca Raton to start their personal computer division, maybe between the combination of forcing redistricting upon parents who may not necessarily want it, and the fact that we want to treat this as an opportunity to show how things could be done in a new and innovative way, we thought that initially our recommendation, again to be vetted by the task force to follow, should be that it would be a choice school, maybe with a neighborhood overlay, but certainly a choice school to start.
Yeah. I find it interesting that there are, as you mentioned, programs like the social justice pathway and Connections that parents do seem to enjoy very much. And the idea of taking the existing schools then and trying to change some of their culture was also part of what your committee looked at, changing what happens at existing schools. Can you talk a little bit about that, what possibilities there are?
Yeah, we got a lot of feedback from our interviews and focus groups that people felt the the programs that we have are very good, and we have there's a lot of electives, but they don't feel the same level of social connectedness as they could. And in fact, when we looked at the data, not only are parents, the ratio of happy to unhappy when it came to the elementary school was 7-1, right, in terms of school size. But it dropped off dramatically when you get to the middle schools and high schools. So it was like 2-1 or 1-1. And then on top of that, we found that the kids themselves, as evidenced through the California Healthy Kids Survey, the scores themselves when they were fifth graders dropped off, because this test is taken every 2 years, survey. Fifth graders to seventh grade to ninth grade, you can see also a similar drop-off in happiness or connectedness. And we thought that we needed to do something about that. And so that's what led to our second recommendation, which is also to what I call, make the schools smaller by sorting them into smaller learning communities. So have the illusion of a smaller school through teams or cohorts where people know each other better. Instead of a big high school of a class of 500, you might have 3 classes in your senior year, or 2 senior, or whatever, right? Yeah. And we call this kind of in our shorthand the Harry Potter model combined with the Oxford Small College tradition.
Yeah. Are there
So I'm
schools
having
locally?
trouble reconciling that, though, with your earlier comment about the reluctance within the current schools of the teachers to embrace significant change. So to me, what I see here is a proposal for a new school that would be attempting to draw from all over the city, that can't be online for at least 3 years, if probably longer, given the complexities of working with the city of Palo Alto and renovating it and so forth. But parallel to that is a proposal to make these changes at our existing schools in an environment that you've yourself said is resistant to this kind of change. This seems like a lot of moving pieces that it's a little hard to see the path forward here.
I agree that there's some tension in the system where there's a lot of things we're asking the community to do. And unlike other school districts where there was a clarion need for change, or like Hillsdale High School back in 1990, the year 2000, they were at the bottom of the test scores, and the people are moving out of the district and so forth. We don't have that same level of urgency. However, at the same time, we also recognize, being forward-thinking parents and community leaders, that what we have today isn't necessarily the right solution for the kids of the 21st century. We're learning more and more in the private sector and other academic studies that people are saying the way we teach our kids needs to fundamentally resolve itself, right, and have a new approach. And then on top of that, it was worrisome when we saw that the connectedness scores keep dropping and parents are unhappy and so forth. So that's why we thought that even though it's a heavy lift and there's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts, so we can't just ignore the problem and hopefully that it just goes away and we can have another committee convened in 3 or 4 years. I think we have to tackle it now, or at least make good faith efforts to tackle it now. And if every year and every month is better than the last one, I see that as success. We don't need to solve for world hunger, but we just have to make it better than it was.
Right. This committee that you're recommending, they would be addressing the innovative middle/high school. Who would be carrying forth the idea of innovating schools within schools at the current high schools? How would that work itself out?
I think that requires, because it involves the existing schools as it is, I would recommend that team also be formed. Maybe it's a subgroup of the task force that we recommend. But carrying teachers, administrators, parents, students should all be part of that. One of the things we learned from the Hillsdale High School experience is that it was kind of an organically driven process where they formulated certain core values that was important to their community. And then from that, the teachers had a central role in defining how Hillsdale High School would look. And that was one of the case studies that we looked at.
And we have a house system now, right?
They have a house system.
Sort of cohorts.
How does that work?
I forget what the house names are.
Kyoto, Macaresh, and Florence.
It's the idea of sort of cohorts, and I don't know if they focus on particular topics or...
That's right. These they have a super homeroom where these kids are together for a period a day. And then on top of that, they have 4 classes that are in common: history, English, social studies, and science. And they, importantly, not only do they have these advisories, which are super homerooms, where they talk about thematic subjects, but they also, these kids have stayed together as a cohort for 2 years across grades. And the feedback we hear is that they are much more comfortable in talking to each other and opening up, just like you can imagine adults would be if you knew each other much better than as strangers.
Yeah, and how many in each house?
Each house is 130. They have a freshman class of 330 or so. And then the whole high school, it's a four-year high school just like ours. There are about 1,300 kids.
Yeah.
So it's, not necessarily all those ideas would be applicable to the Palo Alto district, primarily because you're taking one class away for these advisories, which are homerooms. And so that would cost in terms of electives. But maybe some ideas from that can be adopted, such as having kids go through together for 2 years. And maybe we can't do it at the junior and senior years because people by that time have varied interests and they want to take different things. But you could hold it together at least from 6th grade all the way through 10th grade.
Did your committee look at the middle schools and the high schools as separate issues initially, and then decide that they really should be merged together as they are sort of in the report? Or did you start from the get-go looking at them as one system, 6 through 12?
No, our analysis was very separate. We looked at the middle school separate from the high schools. I think in the high schools the pressures are more academic. In the middle schools the pressures from the verbatims and the interviews seem to be more social pressures. But when it came to Cubberley, our recommendation is not necessarily a 6 through 12 school. It could be just a piece of land that's contiguous, and you could have an upper division or lower division with a fence in between or something, whatever model. And those are design details that we didn't really work out. We just knew that we had a big piece of land that could accommodate more than just a middle school or just a high school. And maybe that's, the two subcommittees have to get back together, but one of the ideas is maybe make Cubberley a K through 12 with 3 separate subcampuses. And that way it simultaneously solves the 13th elementary school problem and the choice programs that we might want to do. So again, a lot of decisions to be investigated by the board, but we wanted to inform the community of some of our thinking before we got there to that stage.
So did you look at the possibility of not having a high school at Cubberley and sticking with a 2 high school system we've invested all this bond money in improving, and instead just having a new middle school and making it a geographic middle school and have the focus be on raising all boats at all 4 middle schools, implementing the kind of programming that you're talking about?
We considered it, but the verbatims from the high schools were similar to those when we did focus groups at the middle schools. And we thought that to solve just the middle school problem without the high school wasn't the right answer because it seemed at least as acute when it came to the high schools. So that's why we gravitated pretty quickly toward a secondary school solution, whether it's 1 school or 2 schools. That's something TBD.
Yeah, it does seem that creating a 3rd high school is more challenging in that you can't really do a full-blown high school program. I mean, the investment that would be required to match up with athletic programs, with the theater program, the journalism program, the robotics program, all these things that attract students to the 2 current high schools really can't be very easily replicated, at least not at a reasonable price, at a 3rd school. So it seems like the 3rd high school, if it were to be created, would by its very nature need to be a magnet school that had some sort of special focus, which I assume from your report would be this project-based learning emphasis. But at the same time, you're saying you would like to see that implemented at the current high schools. So I'm just having trouble envisioning what the magnet high school would be all about. And if I'm a student that wants to participate in high school athletics, then no matter how committed I am to project-based learning, I've got to go to Gunner Powell.
Yeah,
right?
I think you're asking the question, is it possible, what is the opposite of a choice school? Is the opposite of a choice school, can it be comprehensive? And I think it can be. I think that's a definitional issue. I think you could have a small comprehensive school if the community chose that, but you're right. At the scale of 600 kids, it may be difficult because usually if you want to get to scale, you need 1,000. Right. So one solution could be that Cubberley needs to be bigger. We need to be more ambitious in offloading the existing schools. Right? But what kind of resonated through our mind was that, like one of the board members said, Melissa, this is a conservative community. Right? We have a lot of success already in this community. And to arbitrarily impose something of that change magnitude might be difficult. So to that end, we thought maybe the solution would be to have a choice program where people opt in rather than forcing their hand. But again, this is something that we can explore, and I think some of the comments that you made are perfectly valid. How do we not only solve the new school, but also simultaneously improve the boats for everybody, a rising tide, right? And we do not support an exceptionalism narrative in our recommendation. We're pretty careful to say that there's really 2 recommendations here. Maybe there ought to be 3 recommendations, but these are things our greatest motivation is the fact that we sense in the community a need for doing something new or different. And whether that new or different, the greatest fear we had as a community was that we would just think things are okay. We honestly believe in the committee that things are not okay, that we could do much better. We're talking about taking our schools from better to great. And that requires some heavy lifting and elbow grease. And fortunately, I feel that we live in a community which is not only financially capable of doing this, but we have a lot of people and parents who are interested in leaning in, they have the skills and they have the educational background to really be creative around some of these things. And I feel very positive about that after hearing the board meeting on Monday night. It was a great turnout.
Yeah. I've always been attentive to the kind of north-south issues because I grew up in the south of the city, and my sister was actually one of the last classes at Cubberley, so I remember when that one actually was a high school. In your research, did you discover any kind of demand north versus south in terms of enrollment growth for the high school area? I know that there's we have so many choice programs in the elementary schools and people are driving here and there. I'm curious, because it's been brought up that maybe the third high school should be a neighborhood school.
Yeah.
I'm curious about north-south enrollment.
In our secondary
And the
school,
traffic issue
yeah,
as well.
traffic.
yeah. In our secondary committee, we didn't actually pick up a north-south distinction, but I know in the elementary school work, which I'm not as familiar with, we do know that Palo Verde district, where those kids in that boundary catchment area are more impacted than other parts of the school. And so for that reason, due to natural growth in the south compared to the north of Palo Alto, where there's empty classrooms, in the south there isn't, I think that's an area, that's an opportunity for us to examine altogether. Maybe that's the reason why the notion of a K through 12 located at Cubberley would be a great idea, because it solves simultaneously the south problem for elementary schools, and then makes it a different program for the secondary schools.
You mentioned, I think you mentioned earlier, private efforts or interests in creating new program, new approach, new philosophy. What do you mean by that? And I guess at the root of my question is part of the impetus or pressure that's being felt to make these changes because of the fact that there are many competitors out there in the form of private and charter schools. The last time we did anything that you might consider a significant innovative change in this school district was implementing Mandarin immersion. And I think it's pretty clear that what was behind that was the very real concern that a charter school might be formed. How much of that got talked about as a sort of a threat facing the district?
Well, we do know that there's a lot of private schools in the area. There's over 50 alone that draws from
Yeah, it's
and
incredible.
families. So,
A lot of new ones opening.
and a new one's opening. I can honestly say I wasn't involved in the Mandarin discussion, so I don't have background on that. But I can honestly say that we didn't really think of that as a core driving reason for why we wanted to do this. I think our core driving reasons were the fact that our schools are just too big. Right? There's a lot of data that proves that, and there's a lot of data that parents are unsatisfied. And there's a lot of data that says our kids need to be less siloed as they think about careers in the 21st century, long after we're gone. So those are the driving factors behind what we're thinking, and the fact that the competition is out there. I think competition will always be out there. There will always be a subset of families who are going to be interested in doing something special. Because my wife went to a private school, right? But I think for the families who are in Palo Alto, they want more choices than they currently do. Not everybody is super academic in the same way, or silo academic. Yeah. And so we need to provide, we need to be responsive to the community. I think that's one of the theses that we came into. Yeah.
I was struck at the meeting on Monday night that probably half or more of the speakers said their kids were in private school.
Really? Yeah. 22 speakers, that was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it was. So what's the next step for this subcommittee and for the board as well?
Well, first of all, our recommendation from Monday night were preliminary, right? We've done a lot of thinking, but I think we can refine our thinking through input from the school board, from community members, and so forth. And we'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
We have another meeting the second week of November to refine our work together and answer some of the direct questions that the board had, including how much does this really cost? Can we afford it all? What do we do about the other 6,000? Can we have innovation across the board? Some of the questions that you posed as well. And then we'll be in a position to write a final report by December, at least for the first phase of work. But I really see the second phase as important as well, which is we asked the board to kick off a task force to really examine the how. We talked about the what, right, and the motivation behind the what, but the how, the devil's in the details, right? So we want this task force to really join hand in hand with the community, with the city, with Stanford. We have an educational resource that's terrific here. They helped with Hillsdale High School in redesigning their own program, and maybe they can help us as well. And then have a set of recommendations that the board can act on specifically by the May-June time period of next year.
Well, Jolie, it's been a really rousing discussion. Thank you so much for bringing your insights here to the Weekly. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Catch us on paloaltoonline.com or follow us on Twitter at Palo Alto Weekly. That wraps it up for this week.